I've been told that people seem to think that I love to hear myself talk. And it is very true. I do love to hear myself talk. They'll never get me to admit it, but I do. Mensis Wave, let's introduce him. Some people might know him. Some people might hate him. Some people might enjoy him. He has been probably a YouTuber from, yeah, I remember him being on YouTube for a while. He talks a lot about culture. He talks a lot about stuff like that. You might agree or disagree with some of his other takes, but he's got a couple of good videos on Old Gamergate about like what it was actually about that had some pretty good sourcing. So we're going to go ahead, see what he has to say about Gamergate 3, because we are most likely going to be seeing a lot of litigation on this point. And by litigation, I mean not like legal litigation, but like people going into and talking about what's happening in this. So we'll go into the discussion being prepared. All right, my friend.
Hey, internets. So it appears that Gamergate is trending yet again, alongside more proof of the fact that game journalists aren't really gamers, but rather they can be more or less described as an interconnected, corrupt group of ideologues who have taken...
Remember, all you have to do is look at the gameplay footage of the guy stumbling against the Cuphead tutorial in order to look to see what our gaming peers, quote, are judging video games by. Man.
Taken over the industry and then use their platform to basically spread propaganda. Mostly neo-Marxist propaganda. To those of us who have researched this topic and looked into the industry at large, this is an obvious fact. But to many people, it still remains elusive. And so it's nice to have yet another piece of pretty strong evidence to point out the fact that, again, game journalists are not gamers. And this all really comes down to the drama surrounding the game that recently got released, Mixtape. And
the gift that keeps on giving. The gift that will continue to keep on giving. I learned about Minces from Leaflet. He's got great videos. Listen, I actually really like Leaflet. I really like her content. So I know exactly. And honestly, believe it or not, I started watching more Minces videos because also she watched them. Like I'd watched him before and then I kind of had stopped watching him, but then she started watching him and I was like, oh, I should get back into listening to some of his videos. So we're on the same page here. We're in good company. That man's going to die with the Cuphead tutorial video. That man's going to have that plastered all over his tombstone. You're not wrong.
Now the game is just kind of a stereotypical, highly astroturfed woke schlop.
It is.
Every game journal publication just suddenly randomly gave this game a 10 out of 10. It started out with overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, which of course is a thing that can happen legitimately, but many people noticed that this was not legitimate at all. While there's no smoking gun to make a long story of the drama short, there's some pretty strong evidence to suggest that this is fake that many people have already gone into, so I won't really go too much into that.
All right, there's our Endymion. Oh, it's another video from Side Scrollers. I'll have to go check that one out. I'm like writing down like things like, oh, furiously write that down, write that down.
We'll point out instead are the things I believe most people are missing with this. Which is that even if all...
sorry, I hate to pause you here, Minces, for a moment, but there's also another good video. Let's see. All right. Is this it? I think this is it. Yeah, right here. So this by the Dizimbro is another good. I actually suggested this to another viewer in the comments of my last mixtape video. This is actually a really good video kind of going over like the people behind mixtape and like who did it, like what the company's all about. So if you really wanted to get into like a deeper discussion about that, go for it. The Dizimbro, I was wrong about mixtape video, it's so much worse, is really good.
All of these reviews for Mixtape were, in fact, entirely genuine and truly coming from these journalists as their actual real...
I cannot believe that any of these reviews were genuine.
...opinion. And so despite the evidence of millionaire backing...
That's a lie. I can believe probably about half of them were genuine because these people genuinely have no idea what they're doing in life. But the other half of them most certainly weren't genuine because I bet you that genuineness has been purchased by a sleight of hand that it revealed a bunch of money. I smell the acrid plastic of astroturfing from Mixtape like immediately. You are correct.
And Nepo baby devs pretending to be indie devs. Let's just pretend that all of these journalist reviews are entirely real. That the journos actually sincerely believe it is a 10 out of 10 game. Because I would argue that if they really do believe this, then it is actually just as, if not more, delegitimizing to the game journalist industry than if they were bribed to give all these positive reviews.
I could see that coming from an interesting perspective, actually. If we take on good faith that they're telling us that this is actually a 10 out of 10 game, then that means that not only are they not, that means that first of all, if they're not bought and paid for, then the only other alternative to that is they are so far detached from the larger gaming community that it shouldn't even matter what they say anymore anyway. Like, yeah, no, like there is no right answer for them.
Because I decided to do the thing. I decided to actually...
Honestly, if they just came out and said, yeah, they bought a 10 out of 10 review from us, I think a lot of people would be like, okay, I respect that you're at least not lying straight to my face anymore.
Well, sort of play the game to see what all the fuss was about and to see if this was a something burger or a nothing burger that I could just ignore. Because again, sometimes culture wars
we did
matter,
play the
and
game,
sometimes
and
it's just
it was
stupid
garbage.
slop. This is one of the
It actually, I was sick beforehand, but I'm going to say it hyperbolically. It actually made me physically ill for the rest of the night.
times that it turned out it mattered. Now, fortunately for me, I didn't actually have to physically buy the game or play it myself because Mixtape is really just a story. It is more like an interactive movie than a real game, which by itself, that doesn't automatically make it a bad game. I mean, there's plenty of visual novels and story-based games out there. Tons of RPG games are just story-driven.
At this point, you would just respect the side hustle if they were directly just paying for the game to be rated highly. I agree. 100%. I'd be like, you know what? At this point, at least you admitted it to me. I know I'm never going to trust you again, but at least you admitted that you just were purchasable. Like you're an industry hooer.
I watched this
so to
game,
speak,
basically just by watching somebody else stream it. I noticed a lot of problems that stood out. Here's just a quick mini review. The problem with the quote-unquote game is that it's a story-based game with a very predictable and very generic story. But the thing that shows the problem with game journalists is how it's supposed to be a nostalgia bait story, but it doesn't actually do that if you're a gamer. And I wouldn't even say it's that bad, as in it horrible 1 or 2 out of 10 bad. It's
I would say that like on the period of nostalgia, sure, it might have gotten some people nostalgic for a time. You can argue whether or not it does or doesn't exist all day, but nostalgic for maybe their childhood. But I would make the guess that the target demographic for that is much, much older, at least for this type of thing, than the people who are buying games.
More like this game story is a solid 4 out of 10, or a forgettable D+ experience. Specifically, the plot is extremely midwit coded. It panders to the type of normie that doesn't want to accept the fact that they are a normie, where they seem to think that listening to pseudo-alternative music is enough to qualify them as an intellectual. A TLDR of the plot is that you have this group of teenage friends who are going to be attending a party, and they need to find booze for the party, and as they're looking for booze, they run into various things that either trigger a cutscene or trigger a minigame, with a story basically being a generic coming-of-age story. And there's a few huge problems that stand out for this. The first is that the minigames are apparently completely unlosable. Nothing you actually do can...
The minigames are completely unlosable. That's funny. I mean, like, true. Like, there was really, like, I'm going to say that minigames being unlosable are okay if the minigame is fun, but it's just like, okay, why am I here at this point? Why don't you just make it so that it's done? Also, Mintus often has distracting, interesting games that I forget about a quarter of the video. I see what you mean. Yeah, no, he does play some interesting games in his B-roll, which is pretty cool.
A failed score. The person I watched streaming this noted this
especially because they're like mostly indie games.
It's interactable, but nothing you actually do does anything. There's no way to actually fail the mission, even though one of these scenes is like a major platforming section.
I literally left the computer. I set the controller down, left the computer on the segment that had the cart. I was outside of my room. The game played itself. I didn't have to do anything. It made it through the entire place.
But it is a platforming section that is unlosable. If the character fails to dodge a car, for example, they'll just kind of slide over the car instead. In other words, game journalist difficulty is the default and only difficulty mode. No need to actually be any good at the game. And that's not even the biggest problem. Another issue is how the story is effectively what I would call an example of woke washing. because I happen to be one of the people who was born in the 80s and I came of age in the 90s. So you would think that a nostalgia-based game based in the mid-1990s, as well as the fact that the area that the game takes place is very similar to the area that I grew up in, I would have thought that this game would have given me a fix for nostalgia, but it didn't.
And let me guess, you were like, this is not what any of it was like. So I don't think you even made it 3 minutes. I don't even think you even made it into the 3-minute hands-off moment from the one tweet. I didn't. I didn't. I couldn't. I couldn't anymore. I couldn't do it.
It completely failed because all of the dialogue.
Also, I wanted to make sure I could refund the game because I didn't want to give them any money. I wanted to make sure that like I took all my money back from them as I could because I didn't want them to have it.
Politically correctified because these kids do not talk or act like 90s kids. Rather, they talk like a heavily Disney-fied version of them, where nearly all of the very much not politically correct banter that you would normally talk like in the 90s has been completely removed.
The 90s way, Mantis is an unconfirmed. Listen, we don't use that word around here. The way that people talked in the 90s is much very different than the way that people talk now, because we're talking about the media by which they were informed, the area in which they were informed, the way that they related to the world. People in the 90s is very, very different than the very hyper-controlled, HR sensitive way in which people are taught that they have to talk now. And I'm going to say for the worst, because a lot of people, when they talked in the 80s and 90s, they didn't have to worry about their life being destroyed over saying one wrong thing. They were free to say whatever wrong thing that they wanted to a degree, of course, but it's better to be in a system where you can say something wrong, abrasive, maybe even like hateful in a way, as long as you don't take your actions and your actions do not inform, or sorry, do not go down or are controlled by what you hatefully say. And the world was a better place because everybody had the general understanding that you could say whatever you want. The only thing that matters is what you do. And we lost that because now everybody's like, it only matters what you say and not what you do. And we're in a bad spot.
And then, of course, they top it off with the usual DEI representation characters. And it is all, again, very mid-wit coded. None of the characters are likable. Rather, the story remind me specifically of the painfully average kids who would spend their days getting high and listening to music and then getting high again and then listening to more music again, and round and round that goes. That's pretty much their entire...
I knew some people like that. They made their entire personality around that. And it was just like, I can't do that. Like, sure, if you want to do that, I'm not going to tell you that it's wrong. I mean, I will have my opinion that it's wrong, and I have an opinion on why it's wrong, but I'm not going to straight up tell you it's wrong unless you ask me. But I did not like that type of lifestyle. I never could do that because the way that, like, I don't like losing that feeling of control. That's why I don't really drink that much either. It's like, I couldn't do it. I have to at least, like, I have to feel like I'm mentally in control of my facilities in order to like live through life. Otherwise, it makes me so anxious.
Life. Those are the kinds of kids I directly made an effort to avoid back then.
True.
And honestly still disassociate myself from today because they're just boring people. They just kind of exist
they
in
don't really do much.
Vibes and having no real thoughts of their own. And honestly, they don't really ever grow out of that from what I've seen. A lot of them tend to just kind of stay that way as adults. But more importantly, and the big issue here, is that they're not gamers. Because that's the big thing missing from this supposed nostalgia game. It's a game about 90s nostalgia that includes no 90s gaming. Yes, that's right. That's the thing I noticed when I was watching this thing. As you go through these characters' rooms and you look around, there's no gaming.
No NES systems, no, no systems at all. And like, obviously they got a PC, sure, but it's just like, okay, I mean, I think I had that same PC, I'm not gonna lie, but gaming on that was still limited by the computing power at the time.
It's all just generic band groupie schlop stuff. And that's a really key issue here. A nostalgia game aimed at gamers should have some gaming nostalgia to it. For instance, expecting to see a scene where you walk up to a Sega Genesis or something, or at least an NES or an Atari or a Super Nintendo, and talk about games, and reminiscent about the old games, you'd think you'd want to include that. That is, unless, of course, your target audience for this nostalgia is not for gamers. Like, for example, one of my best memories from that time is playing GoldenEye with my friends. Or if not with friends.
Man, look at that screenshot. Those were the good old days.
At 2 a.m. on a Friday night. That's the kind of time that you had if
those
you were
the good old days.
And the weirdest part is they even seem to tease it. These seem to be upper middle class kids in Northern California. And so they have things like TVs and computers in their own room, and yet attached to this classic CRT
Not a circle,
TV
there is one.
no games.
It's not a circle there, but there is one. Oh, which is a weird because there is an overlap between stoners and gamers. Yeah, no, you're right. You're very right because it's a very vibey thing. But also, he's right about there's a VCR. Is that a VCR DVD player? I think that's just a regular VCR.
Where are the games? There's no game.
You knew that if you go into somebody's room, they have a TV and a VCR that their parents could afford it.
Games. Error 404, gaming nostalgia not found. Because, of course, this nostalgia story is not for gamers. Rather, it's a nostalgia story aimed at the upper middle class normie who eventually goes to college on their parents' dime, to then go get a liberal arts degree, and to then get indoctrinated into far left progressive politics,
and
then
have a job that doesn't do
as a
anything.
game journalist. Even though they never were a gamer, never will be a gamer, but they convince themselves that because they prescribe to the correct ideology, that they therefore know better about games than gamers.
And again, as I had mentioned earlier in our stream when we were talking about it, is these people do not use games to be any type of artistic expression, any type of like better cultural or better cultural expansion. These people use all media specifically to bludgeon you over the head with their preferred political ideology. That is the end all case, the be all case of any type of endeavor that they take into any type of dissecting, discussion, or even interacting with any type of or form of media. That's at least a VCR-CD player combo. VCR-CD player, yeah, you're not wrong about that one. But because I saw the other port on it, I didn't know because I said in '99 DVDs were around, but definitely probably maybe a CD player for sure. But these people will only accept anything if it comes down to how can I use this to convince you that I'm right. And I think a lot of people are very done with that because everything feels like a sermon. Everything feels like you're going to church on Sunday. And say what you will about religion. You can be very religious or not very religious. It doesn't matter. Eventually you get to a point where I don't want to have to be felt like I'm being preached to every day of the week. I need a break. Some people romanticize the post-USSR 90s. I hope that anemoia, I forgot how to pronounce that word, but I know exactly what it won't grow that big in our country. Because it's the thing that Real Life Fake Wizard was talking about. I don't know if it's because you're right. When people start making something, if it gets big, there's a cultural thing about that. I think the biggest argument for that, I know Nova's going to love this argument, is the way in which the Renaissance interpreted the medieval period with all the fake things, the faux things that they said happened in the medieval times that just never happened. And it became a major cultural interpretation of that time, and people like to interpret things like that. And I think you're right. Walking around in the skin suit of the 90s and misinterpreting them to be something that they're not is probably not going to be good in the coming future, because I would like the 90s to be represented as they are, because representing it in an interpreted way from how we're looking at it now only serves to devalue how differently and more positively it should be perceived.
And so that's really what this mixtape drama, what we're really seeing here under the hood.
In a way.
Even if we were to take all of the good reviews in good faith and pretend like it's not astroturfed, then it still shows that game journalists are the types of people who honestly don't really enjoy video games.
True.
Which then brings up the question, is it astroturfing, or is it just journos legitimately having terrible tastes as a result of them, again, not really being gamers? And the answer, honestly, is probably just a little bit of both. There's a lot of things that people have uncovered about this game and its backing that is very obviously fishy. Or as I
game journalists not having taste, don't you color me surprised.
Pointed out on X, you do not need to be a conspiracy theorist to see something is wrong with these initial overwhelmingly positive
Wait, released 7 months ago, released 16 years ago. So released 4 days, 3,422 reviews. are those reviews? I can't read that, unfortunately. So, Aizla, you do not need to be a conspiracy theorist to see something wrong with initial overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews on, okay. Access journalism, okay. Schizo time. This just seems odd to me. There are more positive reviews than maximum players for Mixtape, around 1,000 extra positive reviews. Yeah, okay, I see what this is. This is talking about the this is talking about the ratio of reviews in to players out, which is just like, it's more enlightenment than Victorian thing. Okay, well, you know what I mean though. You understood what I meant there, Nova. Especially if we're talking about torture device. Well, yeah, that's one of the things I was talking about. But yeah, the amount of ratio of reviews to total maximum player count, or like concurrent player count, definitely is a little weird, because it's just like, how did you get this many reviews? I don't think that Steam allows people to pay for reviews, but like, maybe we can approach this in a different direction. Maybe some of the total reviews were people who bought the game, reviewed the game, and then immediately sold refunded the game. Maybe that might be where it's from. But then even then, it's still like, excuse me? You can't do that.
Steam reviews for Wokschlaw. Again, Mixtape just being the latest iteration of it. Access journalism makes it very easy for them to pull off these kind of reviews, and of course there's a very strong incentive for them to do this. Not just because faking reviews for a game can get more sales for the game, but also because of the same issue I talked about previously in my long-form video on the Sweet Baby incident and Gamergate 2, which is that the game industry in the West, as well as game journalists for quite some time now, has been completely taken over by people who subscribe to a neo-Marxist progressive ideology, and that this takeover isn't really a natural product of the free market, but rather is due to a complex web of corruption bred by a relationship with the corporate media and the state.
Was it a Ludwig meme? Huge. But this is also another thing where like I can definitely see where we might be having an issue where people who have media companies are forcing essentially some type of ideology down into people. I definitely see that. I think it's plainly obvious to me. Some people want to put, push back on it. And I think maybe that there's some wiggle room to talk about the effectiveness, or rather the pervasiveness of it. I think we can probably have that discussion all day, but it's certainly happening. If you want to argue from a place that influence from on high is influencing down below, then you are failing to see reality for what it is willingly. They were kind of busy doing a lot. Yeah.
That is ultimately
I think the Renaissance was too busy huffing its own paint fumes to be too hard on the previous generation. Well, I wasn't even talking about being too hard on the previous generation. I was mostly talking about the misinterpretation of the previous generation, and maybe like looking at it with a nostalgic feeling that isn't actually in existence, kind of making an analogy to what we're going through here, saying that it's not really a new thing, that this is a thing that we're doing. It's an old thing that we finally put in a way in terms, but we've been doing it for a while, and I'm hoping that we don't continue doing it.
Make sure that some very unpleasant people remain in charge.
Yes.
With woke progressives just being another form of useful idiots that they use to that end. Because of course, their solution to everything is effectively just that the government is corrupt, and the solution is more government, and that if we just
the government is corrupt, the solution is more government. That's funny.
The right people, we could have free stuff. And the whole DEI ideology that gets pushed in the media, it's all just another arm of the structure of the corrupt system. And as for what's specifically going on here with Mixtape, well, it's really just the same thing as the original Gamergate, just targeting a more specific area of the games industry. Because the original Gamergate can be summarized as neo-Marxists trying to take over the gaming industry by injecting itself entirely into games journalism, thus ensuring.
And he has another video on like Gamergate in general, and I can understand like from the directionality in which this comes from, especially like blatantly on the attempting, and I use the word to culturally colonize video gaming as a media, because they already have like a hegemony and a lot of other media outlets that are already culturally colonized by their preferred ideology. And video gaming has been one of the small bastions where people have been able to go to who do not have like a media home, so to speak, and they really need to capture this demographic if they want to maintain full total control. To me, it is very plainly obvious that this is a good play on their part. This is the tactical play. And to a lot of people who want to agree with the ideologies that they might find themselves in agreement with these people, I challenge you to think about the outside consequences of when they finally do gain control and realize that you have one outstanding opinion that they don't agree with. You're going to have a big problem, much like everybody else, and you don't want that's future. It's like programming. You can solve all programs by adding abstractions, except too many layers of abstractions. I'm assuming that you mean too many layers of abstractions make it even worse. And I agree. I totally agree.
Games were largely being given positive reviews, based more so on whether or not those games were pushing the correct ideology, aka the neo-Marxist ideology, rather than reviewing them for, actual gameplay, the things that gamers care about. And one of the things that the establishment failed at when it came to the original Gamergate is that, one, gamers didn't really like it, thus allowing boycotts to actually work, but two, it really only hit the AAA game dev scene. Indie devs have had some wokeness.
Indie devs haven't really given a fuck. Like, they're like, if you're a woke indie dev and you make a good game, nobody gives a shit because you made a good game. If you're a non-woke indie game dev and you made a good game, nobody gives a shit because you made a good game, which is great. If you are a non-woke game dev and you're outspokenly non-woke, there is a higher percentage chance that you are going to be utilized, castigated, and narrativized around, which is unfortunate because there is a disproportionate way in which people approaches these types of scenarios in indie game development, which does make me upset in the abstract because it's very dishonest, it's very manipulative, and does make me want to have more, to have either more accountability for indie devs ubiquitously or less accountability for indie devs ubiquitously, because it's not fair that one side has to outsidesly go through prosecution than the other. So either it should be a rule that holds for all or a rule that holds for none.
In them too, but only when the developer themselves is an actual true believer. But the indie dev scene, due to the nature of it being indie, also has plenty of anti-woke developers, like those behind the Great Rebellion. And so Mixtape seems to me like an attempt to remedy this past mistake. What the corporate journoids seem to be doing now may very well just be an attempt by the establishment to take over the indie dev game scene by falsely labeling games with large amounts of establishment funding behind them as quote-unquote indie, then having game journals give it a bunch of heavily inflated reviews, which allows them to then ensure that the latest woke schlop propaganda title, whatever it may be, is always at the top of the indie game charts as well. And
right. So I see where he's going with this, and I think a lot of people have sussed this out. It's like, this game's not an indie game. Like, you can squint and say that it's an indie game because it is done by an independent developer. It is done and published by indie means. Like, it's wearing the skin suit of indie development. But at the end of the day, it was funded with so much money. It had so many extras. It just seemed like a AAA release under an indie umbrella, and it was definitely 100% inserted into the gaming cultural zeitgeist in order to, or rather, gaming culture. I guess I don't want to use the word zeitgeist in this instance, but inserted into gaming culture to try to point to, quote, an indie game that agrees with them, that does everything that they want, close quote, because they need that in the indie space because of how decentralized and how much more broad the interpretation of people are in the indie space. I can see why they did this. They just did it in such a stupid way because these people aren't smart.
Indie Game of the Year purely by brute force of establishment AstroTurf.
Was it? I feel like I heard a quote from somebody. I think it was Nova who said it to me in a message or something like that. But I think it was Voltaire, and he says, "I prayed to God early in my life that the enemies he sends against me are ridiculous, and he answered my prayer."
That's what appears to be.
I feel like we're kind of there right now.
Pretty disgusting and petty, to be honest. It's almost as if the AAA game devs and corporate journos got mad that the indie game dev scene is starting to outperform the schlop that they have been pushing for the past 20 years. And so this just seems to be their new strategy: falsely label their schlop propaganda title as indie, and then make sure it's given widespread.
There's an indie game, White Knuckle devs describe themselves as queer. I don't care about that because the game is pretty good. I think I've heard of White Knuckle. I haven't played it, but yeah, no, like, honestly, if you're going to be an indie dev, I don't give a shit about like your politics. I don't give a shit about your, who you are. The only time that I care about it is when you make it my problem. If you stop making it my problem, surprisingly enough, I'm going to play a good game when it comes out. I have never made but one prayer to God, a very short one. Oh Lord, Make my enemies ridiculous, and God granted it. Thank you. What a great quote.
Praise. However, the problem though with their tactic is that people have already kind of caught on to it, and thus the same strategies that were effective in Gamergate can be used against this nonsense. For one,
Okay, wait, what is this? The Gatekeeper's Creed. Character design with San Francisco sensibilities. Okay. Race swap of any. Got it. Writing contains certainly anti-white male themes. Okay. I mean, God, this is actually pissing me off to read. Was it gender erasure? Who does this benefit? Sure. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. Yep. Checks out. And yes, it was Voltaire.
Just don't buy their game. Take the Gatekeeper's pledge. Refuse to buy propaganda slop. It's really that simple. And also just spread the word. And
I do that, by the way. I do try to not buy things that I know are made by people who hate me. Granted, indie games have a little bit more of a difference there, especially if indie games, they say, oh, I'm this type of person, and that's really all they say. Like, I'm not going to read too far into it. It's like, okay, you can tell whatever life story you want. But if you specifically go out of your way to say, I hate you and I'm doing this because we need to blank whatever it is to get you to, your type of person to go away, I'm going to be like, all right, I'm just going to put my hands up and say, I'm not engaging with this. It's not worth my time. I don't want to play this game, and I don't want to be told that I'm a bad person just for existing, or I don't want to be told that I'm a bad person for, the opinions that I hold that are relatively anodyne.
Be aware of the fact that corporate journalists for the game industry should rightfully be seen as completely irrelevant. Corporate game journalism, as it currently exists and stands today, should again be viewed as an entirely fraudulent industry. It's not just mixtape that is an AstroTurf title, rather it's game journalism as a whole that is an AstroTurfed industry. And this shouldn't even be seen as a conspiracy theory, this should just be seen as a matter of fact.
Well, if you see this as a conspiracy theory, then you are lying to your eyes. You are adhering quite literally and quite distinctly to the don't believe your lying eyes mentality. You have no thought that you've put into this whatsoever. You only want what you think, or rather what you've been told that you would want. And quite honestly, I don't want to hear your opinions. Like, sure, you might have opinions on other things that you've thought about. I'll hear those. But if you can't at least admit that this seems AstroTurfed, even if you don't believe it, you have to at least admit that, yeah, it looks like that. And now we can have a conversation.
Your average gamer. And then, of course, on the political side of things, we can just look to events like this as more further proof that the solution to our corrupt government and corrupt system is not more government. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support me, you can do so on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. Which, by the way, for the sake of this video, I'm going to put the Gamers Rise Up merch on a limited time sale. The mug especially is pretty good quality. One of my personal favorites. But anyway, again, that is all. Thanks again for watching.
Boom.
Till next time.
Until next time, Mr. Mensis Wave, thank you for your great video. I can't think that games journalism is going to survive for much longer. I'm not going to lie. It really seems like games journalism is kind of going in a way that most people are, obviously most people nowadays don't really listen to them, but like in the wake of giving a 10 out of 10 and all of the other bad reviews, rather relatively bad reviews that they've been giving games that are actually good, people are just so done with them. And that's a good thing. Let it collapse. I don't want to fucking listen to them anymore. I really don't, because I really think that they are bought and paid for, and they really just hate me. Like, I'm not saying me specifically, but me and people like me. And if I'm feeling like that, I'm sure a lot of other people are feeling like that. And that's not a good spot to be in.